Number 124, Bakkula Sutta. This one also, some of the things here may be a bit... Thus have I heard, on one occasion the Venerable Bakkula was living at Rajagaha in the bamboo grove, a squirrel sanctuary. Then Achela Kassapa, a former companion of the Venerable Bakkula in his lay life, went to the Venerable Bakkula and exchanged greetings with him. When this courteous and amiable talk was finished, he sat down at one side and asked the Venerable Bakkula, "Friend Bakkula, how long is it since you went forth?" "It is 80 years since I went forth, friend." "Friend Bakkula, in these 80 years, how many times have you engaged in sexual intercourse?" "Friend Kassapa, you should not ask me such a question as that. You should ask me such a question as this. Friend Bakkula, in these 80 years, how many times have perceptions of sensual desire arisen in you?" "Friend Bakkula, in these 80 years, how many times have perceptions of sensual desire arisen in you?" "Friend Kassapa, in the 80 years since I went forth, I do not recall any perception of sensual desire to have ever arisen in me." Let's stop here for a moment. So what follows in the brackets was added later by later monks, so we won't read that. Now, according to the commentaries to the Majjhima Nikaya, they say that Venerable Bakkula renounced at the age of 80 years old. So since he has gone forth 80 years, he's supposed to be 160 years old. This is a bit hard to believe because the Buddha himself passed away at the age of 80 years at that time. And the Buddha is supposed to have a long life. So hard to believe that he was 160 years old. "Friend, in the 80 years since I went forth, I do not recall any perception of ill will, any perception of cruelty to have ever arisen in me." This is maybe possible for some people because they might have been a past life Arya. They may not have perception or thoughts of sensual desire, ill will, and perception of cruelty. "Friend, in the 80 years since I went forth, I do not recall any thought of sensual desire to have ever arisen in me." "Friend, in the 80 years since I went forth, I do not recall any thought of ill will, any thought of cruelty to have ever arisen in me." "Friend, in the 80 years since I went forth, I do not recall ever having accepted a robe from a householder, ever having worn a robe given by a householder, ever having cut a robe with a cutter, ever having sewn a robe with a needle, ever having colored a robe with dye, ever having sewn a robe at the Katina time, ever having worked on making robes for my companions in the holy life." I'll stop here for a moment. So, this sutta is trying to say that Venerable Bakkula was a very ascetic monk. He has this wonderful and marvelous quality that he doesn't have thoughts of sensual desire, ill will and cruelty. And then his ascetic he practices these ascetic practices. So he does not accept a robe from a householder. That means he collects this pangsukula cloth from corpses and all that, and he sews it into a robe. But then if he doesn't sew, here it doesn't say, he doesn't sew a robe also. So how to wear a robe without ever having sewn a robe with a needle? That's a bit far-fetched because a monk every now and then when his robe gives way, he has to repair his robes, especially during the Buddha's time. So a bit maybe he's very ascetic, this monk, so they stretch it a bit. "Friend, in the 80 years since I went forth, I do not recall ever having accepted an invitation to a meal." This is possible for some monks. "Ever having given rise to the thought, oh, may someone invite me to a meal. Ever having sat down inside a house. Ever having eaten inside a house." Now, this is possible for certain ascetic monks. They only want to beg for their food. Just like Venerable Kassapa, he doesn't go to house dana. "Friend, in the 80 years since I went forth, I do not recall ever having grasped at the signs and features of a woman, ever having taught the Dhamma to a woman, even as much as a 4-line stanza, ever having gone to the nuns' quarters, ever having taught the Dhamma to a bhikkhuni, ever having taught the Dhamma to a female probationer, ever having taught the Dhamma to a female novice. This seems a bit far-fetched. Seems like he never talks to a woman or so. Friend, in the 80 years since I went forth, I do not recall ever having given the going forth, ever having given the full ordination, ever having given dependence, ever having had a novice wait on me. Stop it for a moment. That shows he does not accept disciples. He lives alone. Friend, in the 80 years since I went forth, I do not recall ever having bathed in a bathhouse, ever having bathed with bath powder, ever having undertaken the work of massaging the limbs of my companions in the holy life, ever having had an affliction arise in me, even for as long as it takes to milk a cow, ever having taken medicine, even as much as a piece of gallnut, ever having used a bolster, ever having made up a bed, ever having entered upon residence for the rains in a resting place inside a village. Let's stop here for a moment. So here shows that he's very ascetic. He doesn't mix with other monks, so he doesn't do things like what they call in Thailand upatak, like massaging a senior monk or serving other monks and all that. But here he doesn't talk about serving other monks. But he says he never gets sick at all. Apparently he's a very, very fit monk. But one thing about ascetic monks, because they are very ascetic, they live in the forest, they're very pure lifestyle, they are extremely fit. I've seen some forest monks in Thailand, even though they are older than me, but they at that time when I went to Thailand, at that time when I first went to Thailand, I was 38 years old, and I went on Tudong, this, how do you say, going on, how do you say Tudong, Long Pa, how do you say, like going to the forest, with this 45-year-old monk. At that time, I was surprised, he was much fitter than me, being older than me. Well, of course, not that much difference. But like when we walk up the hill, on the level ground, he walks so fast. When he goes up the hill, he doesn't slow down, just the same speed he goes up the hill. At that time, I was very surprised. Then later, I found that actually the lifestyle of a forest monk makes you very, very fit. Sometimes you get caught in the rain and all that. Now you're sleeping in the forest. You get wet and all that, you don't get sick. Because the mind is strong. When the mind is strong, the body also is strong. Like nowadays, doctors say a lot of people's sickness is mind-made. Friend, for 7 days after going forth, I ate the country's alms food as a debtor. On the 8th day, final knowledge arose. Stop here for a moment. So he went forth on the 8th day. He attained arahanthood. This shows he's somebody with great, what they call paramis, these perfections of character from past life, very probably past life Arya. Then Achela Kassapa said, I will receive the going forth in this Dhamma Vinaya. I will receive the full ordination. And Achela Kassapa received the going forth in this Dhamma Vinaya. He received the full ordination. Stop here for a moment. So even though this friend, Achela Kassapa, asked Venerable Bakkula to be ordained, but Venerable Bakkula, as we read earlier, he does not ordain anybody, so probably he brought him to other monks to ordain. And soon, not long after his full ordination, dwelling alone, withdrawn, diligent, ardent, and resolute, the Venerable Kassapa, by realizing for himself with direct knowledge, here and now entered upon and abided in the supreme goal of the holy life, for the sake of which clansmen rightly go forth from the home life into homelessness. He knew directly, birth is destroyed, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done, there is no more coming to any state of being. And the Venerable Kassapa became one of the Arahants. Stop here for a moment. So this Achela Kassapa was very impressed by his friend's description of his various wonderful and marvelous qualities. So impressed that he asked to ordain. and he ordained, and a few years later, probably he became an Arahant. Then on a later occasion, the Venerable Bakkula took a key and went from cell to cell. Here, cell to cell means room to room, the kutis, saying, "Come forth, Venerable Sirs, come forth, Venerable Sirs. Today I shall attain final Nibbana." Then seated in the midst of the Sangha of monks, the Venerable Bakkula attained final Nibbana. So being Arahant was well cultivated. When his time came to enter Nibbana, he knew when he was going to enter Nibbana. So he informed the monks. So they came to see him and he attained final Nibbana. According to the commentaries, he's a type of monk who does not want to trouble other monks. So he entered, when he was about to pass away, he entered into the fire casino, meditated on fire, and used that fire to light his body, cremate his body. So all remained was ashes. It's possible for some Arahants who have this, this is one of the psychic powers.